What happens when Britain's most fearless talk show host comes face to face with the royal who turned his back on the monarchy? You won't believe what unfolds when Kevin O'Sullivan decides he's had enough of Prince Harry's victimhood narrative and delivers the confrontation that's been years in the making. This isn't just another celebrity interview. This is the moment when polite royal protocol gets thrown out the window and the gloves come off in spectacular fashion. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two collide in what can only be described as television gold. Last night's episode of The Kevin O'Sullivan Show was supposed to be a carefully orchestrated publicity appearance for Prince Harry's latest venture. But what viewers witnessed instead was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control when a seasoned broadcaster refuses to play by the royal rulebook. The atmosphere in the studio was already electric before the cameras even started rolling. Behind the scenes, tensions were reportedly running high as Harry's team had submitted an extensive list of topics that were strictly off-limits, including any mention of his father, King Charles, his brother, Prince William, or specific details about his departure from royal duties. Kevin O'Sullivan, known for his no-nonsense approach and refusal to be muzzled by celebrity handlers, had apparently made it clear to producers that he wouldn't be bound by any such restrictions. As the show's signature music faded and the cameras went live, Kevin opened with his trademark directness that regular viewers have come to expect. Tonight we're joined by Prince Harry, who's here to talk about his new project. Though I suspect our conversation might venture into slightly more interesting territory than his PR team would prefer. The comment drew nervous laughter from the studio audience, but Harry's expression remained diplomatically neutral, though those watching closely could detect the slightest tightening around his eyes. The first few minutes proceeded with the kind of sanitized small talk that characterizes most celebrity appearances. Harry spoke enthusiastically about his latest charitable initiative, hitting all the expected talking points about making a difference and using his platform for good. Kevin nodded along politely, but there was something predatory in his demeanor, like a cat toying with a mouse before the inevitable pounce. "It's fascinating how passionate you are about helping others," Kevin said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "especially considering how you've handled your own family relationships. Tell me, does charity really begin at home, or is that just an old-fashioned concept?" The question landed like a precision strike, and the temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees instantly. Harry's media training kicked in immediately. "I think it's important to focus on the positive work we're doing rather than dwelling on personal matters," he replied smoothly, but his knuckles had visibly whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair. The audience sensed blood in the water, and a hushed anticipation settled over the room. Kevin wasn't about to let him off that easily. "Personal matters? Is that what we're calling your very public campaign against your own family? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks less like privacy and more like a carefully orchestrated media strategy designed to maximize sympathy while minimizing accountability." His voice remained conversationally pleasant, which somehow made the words even more cutting. The mask began to slip from Harry's face as his jaw tightened. "I think you're mischaracterizing what was a very difficult period in my life. We've been through challenges that most people couldn't understand, and we've tried to handle them with dignity while protecting our family's privacy." "Dignity?" Kevin leaned forward slightly, his tone sharpening. "Is that what you call writing all books and giving explosive television interviews? Is that what dignity looks like in royal circles these days? Because I have to say, from a commoner's perspective, it looks remarkably like airing dirty laundry for profit." The studio audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word as the conversation veered dangerously off script. Harry's handlers in the wings were presumably having heart attacks, but there was nothing they could do to stop what was rapidly becoming a train wreck in real time. Harry's composure cracked slightly as he shifted in his seat. "You have no idea what we went through. The pressures, the scrutiny, the complete lack of support when we needed it most. Sometimes speaking your truth is the only option left when all other avenues have been exhausted." "Speaking your truth," Kevin repeated thoughtfully, as if tasting the words. "That's an interesting phrase. Not speaking the truth, mind you, but your truth. As if there are multiple versions of reality floating around, and we all get to pick our favorite. But here's what I find curious. In all this truth-telling, why does it seem like you're the victim in every single scenario? That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the deferential treatment Harry had grown accustomed to from most interviewers. This was something entirely different. A seasoned broadcaster who clearly had no intention of pulling his punches just because his guest happened to be born into royalty. Harry's face flushed slightly as he struggled to maintain his composure. I'm not claiming to be a victim. I'm simply sharing my experience of events that happened to me and my family. I think people deserve to know the truth about what goes on behind palace walls. The truth, Kevin mused again, his tone becoming increasingly skeptical. But whose version of the truth are we getting? Because it's quite convenient that in your telling, you're always the wronged party, your wife is always the innocent victim, and everyone else, your father, your brother, your stepmother, they're all the villains in this particular soap opera. The gloves were officially off now, and everyone could sense that something explosive was building. Harry's breathing had become slightly more rapid, and his previously polished demeanor was showing definite cracks. The audience was transfixed, witnessing what felt like a historical moment in television broadcasting. That's not fair, Harry said, his voice rising slightly above its carefully modulated royal register. You're oversimplifying a very complex situation. These aren't characters in a story. These are real people, real relationships that have been damaged by circumstances beyond our control. Kevin's response would prove to be the point of no return, the moment when polite discourse gave way to something far more explosive. Circumstances beyond your control? Kevin's laugh was sharp and humorless. You mean like choosing to move to California? Like choosing to sign multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify? Like choosing to sit down with Oprah Winfrey for 2 hours of primetime character assassination? Those circumstances? His voice dripped with sarcasm as he leaned back in his chair, clearly relishing the moment. Harry's face had gone from flushed to pale, his royal composure hanging by the thinnest of threads. You're twisting everything. We never wanted any of this to become public. We tried to work things out privately, but when that became impossible, we had to protect ourselves and our children. Protect yourselves? Kevin's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. By going on the most watched television interview in years to accuse your family of racism? By writing a book that reveals private conversations and paints your father and brother as cold, calculating villains? That's your idea of protection? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like revenge dressed up as righteousness. The studio audience was completely transfixed now, phones undoubtedly buzzing across social media as clips of the confrontation began spreading in real time. This was the kind of raw, unfiltered television that viewers rarely witnessed, especially involving members of the royal family. Harry's hands were visibly trembling now as he gripped his chair tighter. You don't understand what it's like to have your entire life scrutinized, to have every move analyzed and criticized. The press in this country destroyed my mother, and I wasn't going to let them do the same to my wife. Ah, there it is, Kevin said with satisfaction, as if Harry had walked directly into a trap. The Diana card. How convenient that every time you're backed into a corner, you invoke your mother's memory to justify your actions. Tell me, do you really think Princess Diana would approve of you publicly humiliating her other son? Do you think she'd be proud of you turning your back on the institution she died serving? The mention of his mother in this context was clearly a step too far. Harry's composure finally began to crack in earnest, his voice rising as emotion overtook his media training. Don't you dare bring my mother into this. You have no right to speak about what she would or wouldn't approve of. You didn't know her. You're absolutely right. I didn't know her, Kevin shot back without missing a beat. But the entire world knew her dedication to the monarchy, her sense of duty, her commitment to her role despite personal struggles. And I think most people can see the difference between her approach to adversity and yours. Harry was on his feet now, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood abruptly. This is exactly the kind of toxic, poisonous media culture that drove us away in the first place. You're doing exactly what they did to her, twisting words, creating narratives, using her memory as a weapon. Sit down, Harry, Kevin said calmly, his voice cutting through the prince's outburst like a blade. Unless you're planning to storm out like a petulant child, which would certainly fit the pattern of behavior we've seen from you over the past few years. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Harry remained standing, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he struggled to regain control. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every moment of his internal battle between walking away and staying to defend himself. I'm not going anywhere, Harry said through gritted teeth, slowly lowering himself back into his chair. But I won't sit here and let you assassinate my character based on tabloid narratives and half-truths. Kevin's smile was predatory now, sensing that his prey was wounded and becoming increasingly desperate. Half-truths? These aren't tabloid narratives, Harry. These are your own words, your own interviews, your own book. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm simply holding up a mirror to what you've already said publicly. The temperature in the studio seemed to rise as the confrontation reached a new level of intensity. Harry's media handlers were presumably in full panic mode, but there was no graceful way to extract their client from this rapidly deteriorating situation without making him look even worse. You're taking everything out of context, Harry insisted, his voice strained. Every quote, every story, you're presenting it in the worst possible light to support your predetermined narrative about me. My predetermined narrative? Kevin laughed again, the sound echoing through the now silent studio. I don't need a narrative, Harry. Your actions speak for themselves. You've spent years complaining about media intrusion while simultaneously courting that very same media when it suits your purposes. You've criticized the royal family for their alleged lack of support while refusing to support them in return. You've demanded privacy while sharing the most intimate details of your family relationships for profit. Harry's jaw was clenched so tightly now that the muscles in his face were visibly straining. Everything we've done has been about building a better life for our children, about breaking cycles of dysfunction and creating positive change in the world. Positive change? Kevin's voice dripped with incredulity. What positive change has come from your public war with your family? What good has been accomplished by airing your grievances on the world stage? Because from where I'm sitting, all I see is a man who's burned every bridge in pursuit of celebrity status, while wrapping it up in the language of social justice. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Harry's face went through a series of expressions: hurt, anger, frustration, and something that looked almost like recognition. For a moment, it seemed as though Kevin's brutal assessment might actually penetrate his defensive armor. But instead of capitulation, what emerged was something far more dangerous: pure, unfiltered rage. Harry's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level as he fixed Kevin with a stare that could have melted steel. You think you know me? You think you understand what we've been through? You have no idea what it's like to watch your wife contemplating suicide because of the hatred and racism directed at her by your own countrymen. The studio fell into absolute silence as Harry's words hung in the air like a live grenade. This was no longer television entertainment. This was raw human emotion spilling out in real time, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Kevin, for his part, seemed to realize that the conversation had entered truly dangerous territory, but rather than pulling back, he leaned forward with renewed intensity, preparing to deliver what would prove to be the final, devastating blow that would push this confrontation beyond the point of no return. And there it is, Kevin said with cold precision, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The nuclear option. When all else fails, when your arguments fall apart, when your contradictions become impossible to defend, you play the suicide card and the racism card simultaneously. It's emotional blackmail of the highest order, and frankly, Harry, it's beneath even you. The words landed like physical blows. Harry's face went white, then red, then white again, as the full implication of Kevin's accusations sank in. Around the studio, Crew members exchanged horrified glances, realizing they were witnessing something that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. "How dare you?" Harry whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying the weight of absolute fury. "How dare you minimize what my wife went through? You're sitting there, safe in your little studio, making jokes about a woman who nearly took her own life because of people like you." "People like me?" Kevin's voice rose to match Harry's intensity. "I'm not the one who put her in the spotlight, Harry. I'm not the one who dragged her into a centuries-old institution and then acted surprised when it came with pressure and scrutiny. You knew exactly what you were signing her up for, and when it got difficult, instead of protecting her privately, you turned her pain into your greatest weapon against your own family." Harry was shaking now, his entire body vibrating with barely contained rage. "You're sick. You're absolutely sick. This is exactly why we had to leave. Exactly why we had to get away from this toxic, poisonous environment that treats human suffering as entertainment." "Oh, please," Kevin shot back, his own composure finally beginning to crack as the confrontation reached its crescendo. "Don't lecture me about treating suffering as entertainment when you've built an entire media empire on the back of your family trauma. Netflix specials, Spotify podcasts, tell-all books. You've monetized every tear, every argument, every private moment of pain, and turned it into content for public consumption." The studio audience was completely silent now, some covering their mouths in shock at the brutality of the exchange unfolding before them. This had gone far beyond television. This was personal destruction happening in real time. Harry stood up again, this time with such force that his chair toppled backward, crashing to the floor with a sound that echoed through the studio like a gunshot. "I'm done. I'm absolutely done with this character assassination disguised as journalism. You want to know why we left? This is why. This exact mentality, this complete lack of basic human decency." "Sit down and finish what you started," Kevin commanded, his voice now matching Harry's volume as all pretense of professional courtesy evaporated. "You came here to promote your latest venture, to rehabilitate your image, to play the victim one more time. Well, here's your moment. Explain to these people why they should feel sorry for a millionaire prince who abandoned his duty, betrayed his family, and then spent years profiting from the betrayal." "I don't owe you or anyone else an explanation," Harry snarled, his royal accent now completely abandoned in favor of raw emotion. "I protected my family the only way I knew how, and if that makes me the villain in your twisted worldview, then so be it." Kevin rose from his own chair now, the two men facing each other across the small studio space like gladiators in an arena. "Protected your family? You destroyed your family, Harry. You took a sledgehammer to centuries of tradition, relationships, and loyalty for what? For Hollywood money? For celebrity status? For the approval of people who'll drop you the moment your victim narrative gets stale? At least I chose love over duty?" Harry spat back, his voice cracking with emotion. "At least I chose my wife and children over an institution that would have destroyed them just like it destroyed my mother." "Love over duty?" Kevin's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You chose selfishness over service, Harry. You chose personal grievance over public responsibility. And now you have the audacity to stand there and claim moral superiority while the institution your grandmother spent 70 years building has to clean up the mess you left behind." The mention of Queen Elizabeth was the final straw. Harry's face contorted with pure rage as he took a step toward Kevin, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, it looked as though the confrontation might become physical, and security personnel moved closer to the stage area. "Don't you dare bring my grandmother into this," Harry roared, his voice echoing through the studio with such force that several audience members actually flinched. "She's the one person in all of this who deserved better, and you using her memory to score cheap points makes you no better than the tabloid scum you claim to be fighting against." Kevin stood his ground, unflinching in the face of Harry's rage. "Your grandmother deserved a grandson who honored her legacy instead of dismantling it for profit. She deserved loyalty instead of betrayal. She deserved dignity instead of this public circus you've created." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For several long seconds, Harry stood frozen, his chest heaving, his face a mask of pain and fury. Then, something seemed to break inside him. Not his anger, but his will to continue the fight. "I'm done," he said quietly, his voice now completely drained of emotion. "I'm done with all of this." He turned toward the stage exit, his movements mechanical and defeated. Kevin wasn't finished. "That's right, walk away. Just like you walked away from your responsibilities, just like you walked away from your family, just like you walk away from everything when it gets too difficult to face the truth about what you've become." Harry stopped dead in his tracks, his back still to Kevin and the cameras. For a moment, it seemed as though he might turn around for one final exchange. Instead, he simply shook his head and continued walking. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kevin said, turning back to the cameras as Harry disappeared into the wings. "Prince Harry, everyone." A man who confused running away with moving forward, who mistook destruction for liberation, and who somehow convinced himself that burning bridges was the same as building a better future. The studio erupted into chaos as Harry's departure sent shockwaves through the audience. Crew members scrambled, producers shouted into headsets, and the cameras continued rolling as Kevin stood alone at center stage, having delivered exactly the kind of confrontation that would dominate social media and news cycles for days to come. In the wings, the sound of raised voices could be heard as Harry's team presumably dealt with the fallout of what had just occurred. But the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to rehabilitate his image had instead exposed every raw nerve, every contradiction, every painful truth that he'd spent years trying to avoid. Kevin straightened his tie and looked directly into the camera with the satisfaction of a man who had just accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. "We'll be right back after this break," he said calmly, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed television history. The moment when polite deference to royalty finally gave way to the kind of brutal honesty that changes everything.